The sun baked the red earth of the village square, but the heat radiating from Toba the tortoise was of a different kind entirely. It was the heat of pride, unchecked and roaring. Perched upon the sunrock, a place reserved for elders and storytellers, his polished shell gleamed, a false second sun. Around him, a captive audience of young hares and fox kits stared wide-eyed as he regaled them. His voice, loud and smooth, did not weave a story so much as build a monument to himself. And so, he declared, tapping a claw on his chest, the river itself, seeing my brilliance, chose to part its waters for me. The herons they bowed, the very fish leapt in admiration of my cleverness. He puffed out his chest, his beady eyes scanning the crowd for the awe he believed was his due. The air, thick with the scent of dust and dry maize, seemed to vibrate with his vanity. But beneath the sound of his voice, another sensation began to creep in, a subtle, acrid tang that teased the nostrils. It was the smell of smoke, not the comforting scent of a hearth, but something wilder, something wrong. High above, a thin, dark wisp marred the perfect blue canvas of the sky. It was a delicate, curling thread of promise, or perhaps a warning. In the shadows of the great elderwood tree, the village elders watched him, their gnarled hands tight on their staffs. They did not speak. Their silence was a language of its own, a chorus of deep-seated fear that Toba was too blind and too proud to hear. They watched the tortoise, and they watched the horizon, where the distant smoke seemed to pulse, to coalesce. And for a single, heart-stopping moment, it formed the shape of a vast, lidless eye that stared directly into the heart of the village. The following morning, Toba found a new way to demonstrate his perceived superiority. A family of young squirrels, their tails twitching with earnest energy, were practicing storing nuts for the coming winter. "Little friends," Toba boomed, his voice dripping with false warmth, "you toil so hard, but true strength lies not in the back but in the mind." He gestured to a large pile of his own gourds and belongings. "A great mind like mine should not be burdened by such trivial tasks. To carry for me is a lesson in greatness itself. It is an honor I bestow upon you." The squirrels, too young and trusting to see the manipulation, nodded eagerly, their small frames straining under the weight of his possessions. Toba laughed, a sound like stones rattling in a dry gourd as he watched them struggle. "Faster now, a great thinker's time is precious," he chided, completely blind to the flicker of confusion and hurt in their eyes. From a branch overhead, a small, dun-colored sparrow watched the scene. It did not chirp or flit away. Its head was cocked, and its eyes held an intelligence that was far from avian, a gleam of something ancient and knowing. It was as if the sparrow was not merely observing Toba's actions, but recording them, filing each boast and each act of casual cruelty away in a ledger unseen by mortal eyes. The air grew heavy, and the cheerful chatter of the other forest creatures seemed to dim, as if muffled by a blanket of impending judgment. The harvest festival was the village's most sacred celebration, a time to give thanks to the earth and the sky spirits for their bounty. The square was filled with the aroma of roasting grains and sweet berries, and the air thrummed with the rhythm of the talking drums, telling the old stories of creation and humility. Toba, however, saw only another stage. He strode into the center of the circle, interrupting the chief elder mid-prayer. "These old tales are for children," he proclaimed, his voice slicing through the reverent silence. "Let me tell you a real story. A story of a tortoise who needed no spirits, who needed no blessings, because his own wit was blessing enough." He began to weave a tale where he outsmarted the very spirits of the wind and rain, parodying their ancient dances and mocking their slow, steady ways. A deep unease fell over the crowd. The festive drums faltered, their celebratory beat shifting, without any drummer consciously deciding it, into a low, ominous thrum that sounded less like a heartbeat and more like a warning knell. The flames of the central fire, once golden and warm, flickered and spat, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for Toba with crooked fingers. As he reached the climax of his blasphemous story, puffing out his chest to declare himself the true master of the sky, the heavens themselves responded. Without a single rumble of thunder, a great fork of heat lightning, silent and terrifying, lit up the twilight sky in a single, blinding flash of violet white, searing the image of Toba's boastful silhouette onto the retinas of every terrified villager. In the uneasy quiet that followed the festival, a stranger appeared at the edge of the village. She was an old woman, so ancient her back was bent like a weathered root, her face hidden deep within a hood of faded, woven reeds. She moved through the crowd without a sound, her presence causing a hush to fall in her wake. She approached Toba, who was still holding court, basking in the fearful attention. In her gnarled hands she held a simple, unadorned calabash gourd. She offered it to him. Her voice was a dry rustle of leaves. "The world is parched, little one. This vessel holds more than water. It holds truth for those who are truly thirsty for it." Toba looked from the humble gourd to the woman, and a violent laugh erupted from him. "A beggar's cup for a beggar's wisdom," he sneered. "I drink only from golden chalices. I have no need for your truth." He snatched the calabash and, with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, sent it spinning into the dust at the side of the path. The villagers gasped, but the calabash did not roll away or crack. It settled upright as if placed by an invisible hand. The old woman did not plead or get angry. She simply looked at him, and from the depths of her hood, Toba felt the weight of a gaze that was immeasurably old and sad. Then she turned and melted back into the crowd. When the villagers looked for her, she was gone, vanished as completely as a wisp of smoke, leaving behind only the faint, haunting scent of ozone and burnt honey that clung to the air for a moment before fading away. Unsettled but unwilling to show it, Toba retreated to the riverbank, a place he usually visited to admire his own reflection. "Fools, all of them," he muttered to the water, too scared to recognize greatness when it walks among them. He puffed out his chest, preparing to practice a new boast, but as he stepped onto a large, mossy stone, his foot slipped. His legs scrambled, his shell teetered precariously over the rushing water, and for a heart-lurching second he was certain he would fall. He caught himself at the last moment, his heart hammering against his carapace. As his panic subsided, he became aware of the sound of the river. It was no longer a mindless gurgle. The water, swirling around the rocks, seemed to be forming words, a liquid, whispering voice that said, "The tallest tree catches the fiercest wind." Toba froze, his eyes wide. He stared at the water. "Who said that?" he demanded. Only the river replied. Then he looked down at his reflection. It was not his own face he saw staring back. For a fleeting, terrifying instant, his shell was wreathed in crackling orange flame, his eyes wide with panic and pain. He stumbled backward with a cry, landing hard on the riverbank. He shut his eyes tightly, then forced them open, looking again. The water showed only his own shocked, pale face and the clear blue sky above. But the vision of fire was now a brand seared onto his mind, and the smell of smoke, he realized with a jolt, was clinging to his own scales. A new kind of silence followed Toba now. It was not the silence of awe, but the silence of avoidance. Whispers trailed in his wake, snippets of conversations that died the moment he drew near. "My children dream of fire," he heard a mother rabbit murmur. "The earth feels angry," an old badger muttered, tapping the ground with his staff. Even his oldest friends, the ones who had laughed at his jokes and tolerated his vanity for years, began to keep their distance. A family of kind-hearted moles who always shared their grubs with him now averted their eyes when he approached. That evening he sat at the communal fire pit, a space that had always been his throne. But that night a circle of empty space surrounded him. The other animals gathered in tight, quiet clusters, their conversations a low hum from which he was excluded. He tried to laugh, a loud, forced bray that cut through the night. What grim faces! Has the joy been sucked from the world? The laughter echoed back at him, hollow and alone. No one met his gaze. The warmth of the fire did not reach him. He felt a cold, sharp sting, the sting of isolation pricking at his heart. But pride is a powerful armor. He straightened up, masking the hurt with a sneer. "They are simply jealous," he told himself, though the words rang false. As he sat in his self-imposed exile, he failed to notice the many pairs of eyes observing him from the deep shadows of the forest. Not the eyes of villagers, but the same glowing, intelligent eyes of the sparrows, watching, waiting, their collective gaze a silent jury in the moonlight. The night was deep and moonless when Toba was jolted awake. A sound. A dry, insistent asterisk rattle scrape asterisk rattle scrape asterisk. His heart leapt into his throat. He peered into the gloom of his hut. There, in the center of the dirt floor, was the humble calabash he had thrown away. It was shaking, vibrating with a soft, inner energy, scraping against a small stone as it hummed with a faint, golden light. He stared, disbelief warring with a superstitious dread. As he watched, mesmerized and horrified, the exhaustion pulled him back into a fitful sleep. And he dreamed. He was not in his village, but in a vast, empty sky, a void of deepest indigo. There were no clouds, no sun, only a sea of cold, distant stars. And then the stars began to fall. But they were not falling away from him. They were falling asterisk toward asterisk him, streaking down like a million angry fire arrows, hissing and crackling, each one aimed at his shell. He tried to tuck into his shell, but it felt paper-thin, useless. He was falling, spinning, a helpless target in a cosmic storm of fire. He woke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat, the first light of dawn filtering through his door. The calabash was still. The hut was silent. And then, as clear as if someone were standing beside his bed, a whisper threaded through the quiet air. "You were warned. Had you known the cost, you would have bowed." The next day, Toba tried to dismiss the dream and the whispering gourd as tricks of an unsettled mind. But that evening, as he returned to his hut, he stopped dead. A circle of fire no higher than his ankle burned in a perfect ring around his home. It was a strange, terrifying fire. It did not spread to the dry grass or the wooden walls of his hut. It simply burned, cold and controlled, a barrier of silent judgment. And the smoke was the true horror. It did not rise and dissipate. It coiled and twisted, forming shapes. He saw the faces of the young squirrels contorted in effort. He saw the disappointed gaze of the village elders. He saw the entire village, their forms sculpted from gray smoke, all of them pointing silent, accusatory fingers at him. A wave of cold dread washed over him, so potent it made him tremble. He reached a shaking hand toward the flames, expecting a searing heat. But when his fingers passed through the fire, he felt nothing but an icy, bone-deep chill that made him snatch his hand back with a cry. This was no natural flame. This was a message, written in a language of supernatural power, and for the first time the word punishment began to form in his mind, a dark and terrifying seed. For days Toba jumped at every shadow, the cold fire and the whispering gourd haunting his every thought. His boasts had become infrequent, half-hearted things. As he trudged along a forest path, lost in his troubled thoughts, the same dun-colored sparrow fluttered down and landed on a root directly in his path. It did not chirp. It dropped a single, large leaf at his feet. The leaf was not green but a shimmering silver, and on its surface symbols glowed with a soft, ethereal light, writing that seemed to be made of captured moonlight. He squinted, deciphering the elegant script. "The cleverest of the earth are summoned. The feast of 1,000 suns awaits you above the clouds. Do not keep the spirits waiting." His fear vanished, instantly replaced by a surge of triumphant vindication. "They see it," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "They see my greatness after all. They were testing me and I have passed." The doubts, the omens, the cold fire. It was all a trial, and he, Toba, was the chosen one. To prove the leaf's magic, to prove his own worth, he took it to his cooking fire and held it to the flames. The fire licked at the leaf, but instead of blackening and curling, the leaf merely glowed brighter, the symbols shining with an intense, defiant light, unscathed and more beautiful than ever. That night, buoyed by the invitation, Toba's dreams were not of falling stars, but of glorious ascent. He dreamed he was colossal, his shell a mosaic of polished jet and mother of pearl, inlaid with constellations that danced to his command. He sat on a throne woven from sunbeams and cumulus clouds, and below him, in a sky palace of impossible grandeur, every creature that had ever lived bowed in unison. The sky spirits themselves poured him drinks of liquefied light and whispered praises that sounded like sweet music. "We have been waiting for you, Toba," they sang, "the one true intellect." He felt a power coursing through him, a heady, intoxicating sensation of absolute control and adoration. He woke not with a gasp, but with a slow, luxurious stretch, the phantom feeling of godhood still clinging to him. The craving for that feeling, for that validation, was a physical ache in his heart. He had to get to that feast. He would claim his rightful place. As he lay there plotting his ascent, a faint, dry, familiar laugh echoed from the corner of his hut where the calabash sat. It was not a dream. It was the old woman's laugh, carried on a wind that did not stir the leaves outside. The sound of that laugh shattered his morning euphoria. Anger, hot and sudden, flared within him. He stomped over to the calabash, this source of his unease. "Enough of your tricks," he snarled, and he kicked it. The gourd did not shatter. It rolled a few feet, stopped, and settled. Then a voice emanated from it, clear and resonant, filling the small hut. It was neither male nor female, young nor old. It was the voice of truth itself. "You helped the lost field mouse find its burrow, and I was silent, for that was good." Toba froze, remembering a small, forgotten act of kindness from weeks ago. The voice continued, "You mocked the elders' wisdom before the children, and I wept, for that was pride." A cold knot tightened in his stomach. "You have been weighed and measured, Toba of the village by the river. Your pride," the voice declared with finality, "will be your pyre." The words hung in the air, not echoing but seeming to absorb all other sound. The chirping of birds outside ceased. The rustle of leaves stilled. In that profound silence, the truth of the words landed not on his ears but on his soul. This was no trick. This was a judgment. And for the first time, the fear was not for his comfort but for his very existence. Shaken to his core, Toba wandered the village, the words "your pyre" ringing in his mind. He saw a young hedgehog, newly exploring the world, trip over a root and tumble into a thorny bramble patch. The sight, which once might have amused him, now filled him with a strange anxiety. But old habits die hard. A harsh, nervous laugh escaped him. "Clumsy fool," he called out, the words sounding hollow and forced even to his own ears. "Watch where you're putting your feet. Or don't you have eyes in that head of yours?" The hedgehog, stuck and pricked by thorns, began to cry, a soft, pitiful sound. The moment the first tear fell from the hedgehog's eye, the sky, which had been a clear, pale blue, tore open. There was no cloud, no warning. A single, searing bolt of pure white light streaked down from the heavens with a sound like a giant canvas ripping. It struck an ancient, lightning-blasted oak tree at the edge of the clearing, a tree that had stood for 100 winters. The tree did not just crack. It exploded into 1,000 splinters of charred wood and white-hot embers. The concussion of the blast knocked Toba off his feet. As he lay in the dirt, ears ringing, he saw the smoke from the annihilated tree begin to coil upward. It did not drift away. It formed into a single, colossal, perfectly detailed fist of smoke, which shook itself once angrily at the sky before slowly dissolving. The message was unmistakable. The heavens were no longer just watching. They were displeased. The destruction of the oak tree sent the village into a panic. The air was thick with fear and the smell of ozone and burnt wood. The elders called for a meeting, their voices grave. "The spirits are angry," the chief elder said, his eyes finding Toba across the crowd. "We have allowed pride to fester among us. We must make amends. We must be humble." But Toba, though terrified, was now also desperate. The invitation was his only path to glory, his only chance to prove the spirits wrong about him. As the villagers debated rituals of apology, a spectacle unfolded. The air itself began to shimmer by the sunrock. From the shimmering haze emerged a bird, but like no bird ever seen. It seemed woven from living light and gentle zephyrs, its feathers shifting through all the colors of the dawn. It held in its beak a scroll of woven cloud thread. It sang, and its song was the invitation, a melody that wrapped around Toba's heart. "Come, Toba the clever, the feast of 1,000 suns awaits your wisdom. The sky longs to greet you," the villagers cried out. "It is a trick, Toba. Do not go, it is a trap for the proud." But Toba, his eyes reflecting the birds' radiant light, heard only the confirmation of his dreams. He looked at their fearful, pleading faces and laughed, a last, brittle shield against their logic. "A trap? No, it is my destiny. They would not invite a fool, would they?" And he reached out, taking the scroll of cloud. The moment his claws touched it, a single, fat, glowing ember drifted down from the clear sky, landing at his feet and winking out. A final, silent period to the villagers' warnings. Now committed, Toba faced a practical problem: how to reach the sky. His cunning, prideful mind devised a plan he found brilliantly clever. He called all the birds of the village together. "My friends," he began, his voice oozing a false, warm sincerity, "the spirits have invited me, your neighbor, your friend, to their feast. But they are saddened. They wish to bless you, each of you, but I cannot carry your many gifts. So they have commanded me to bring a single feather from each of you. I will present them, and they will imbue them with eternal luck and prosperity, which I will return to you upon my descent." It was a monstrous lie, wrapped in a glittering promise. The birds, trusting and hopeful, eagerly plucked their most beautiful, most perfect flight feather and gave it to him. Doves, hawks, finches, jays. Soon, Toba had a magnificent, iridescent cloak of feathers. He used thick river reeds to tie them to his shell, creating a glorious, if cumbersome, set of wings. The birds, now grounded, looked on with dawning confusion, but one bird did not participate. The small, dun-colored sparrow watched from a branch, its head tilted. It did not offer a feather. It did not speak. It simply watched Toba's deceit with an expression that was beyond anger, beyond sadness. It was the calm, patient gaze of a judge who knows the verdict is already sealed. With a running start and a great deal of clumsy flapping, Toba's feather cloak caught an unexpected thermal, and he was lifted, lurching and spinning, into the sky. He rose through layers of mist, through a cold, thin air that made his lungs burn. Then he broke through. The sight that met his eyes stole what little breath he had left. He was not simply above the clouds. He was in a palace built from them. Towers of swirling, pearl-gray storm clouds stood next to pavilions of sunlit, gold-tinged cumulus. Pathways of shimmering rainbows connected halls of deep, violet nimbus where lightning flickered silently like playful spirits. The air hummed with power, tasting of rain, electricity, and wild, thin wind. And everywhere were the sky spirits, beings of living mist and contained tornadoes, entities with eyes of soft lightning and voices that rumbled with distant thunder. They were magnificent, terrifying, and awe-inspiring. Toba, however, his pride inflated by the sheer effort of his arrival, strutted forward. He saw their majestic forms and compared them to his own. He bowed to no one. He nudged a minor rain spirit with his foot. "You there, where is the welcoming committee? Where is the feast? I have had a long journey, you know, thanks to the inferior flying skills of the birds below." The spirits did not respond with anger, but their swirling forms slowed, their luminous eyes turning toward him. The gentle music of the feast, a symphony of wind chimes and soft thunder, faltered. The air grew still and heavy, the pressure dropping as if before a catastrophic storm. A spirit glided toward him. It was the spirit of the gentle rain, a being of soft gray mist and life-giving water. Its voice was the patter of a million drops on leaves. "Toba of the earth," it whispered, a sound of profound sorrow. "Your journey was one of deceit. Your tongue is a sharp stone, cutting all it touches. Look around you. This is a place of balance, of giving. Humility is the river that smooths the sharp stone. Be the river, we beg you. It is not too late. Be the river, not the stone." For a single, fleeting moment, the truth of the spirit's words pierced Toba's heart. He felt the weight of the stolen feathers, the memory of the crying hedgehog, the cold fire. But the craving for admiration was an addiction too powerful. He laughed, a harsh, jagged sound in the serene palace. "The river? I am not the river. I am the mountain the river flows around. I bow to no one." As the final word left his mouth, the first licks of flame appeared. They were small, harmless tongues of orange and blue that danced around his feet, not burning him, but casting his long, distorted shadow against the cloud walls, a visual echo of his own inflated ego. At that moment, a commotion arose at the edge of the cloud palace. The birds of the village, led by the dun sparrow, had arrived. They had not flown. They had been brought, carried on a cushion of air by sympathetic wind spirits who had heard their cries. The sparrow, its small chest puffed out, spoke, and its voice was now the clear, powerful voice of the earth's conscience. It spoke of Toba's trickery, of the stolen feathers. The doves cooed of his arrogance in the village square. The hawks shrieked of his mockery of the elders. With each testimony, the faces of the sky spirits hardened. The clouds beneath Toba's feet, which had felt soft and firm, began to churn and grow dark. The great sky spirit, a majestic being who held the heart of a wildfire within a form of calm, cool air, now rose to its full height. Its voice was no longer a melody, but the roar of a forest fire consuming 1,000 trees. You were Warned. The floor of the palace, the very cloud upon which Toba stood, groaned like a living thing in agony. A web of cracks, glowing with infernal heat, radiated out from his feet, fracturing the beautiful dreamscape into a nightmare. There was no push, no shove. The cloud simply gave way beneath him. Toba fell, but not silently. The palace itself was erupting. The feast of 1,000 suns became a storm of 1,000 flames. The beautiful, colored clouds turned to black, boiling smoke. The gentle lightning became furious, jagged spears that cracked against his shell. The wind, once a playful zephyr, howled around him like a furious beast. He was a falling star of his own making, trailing the tattered, burning remnants of his stolen feather cloak. He spun, end over end, through a maelstrom of his own pride. Fire, real and searing, licked at his limbs and scorched the once gleaming surface of his shell. He screamed, but the sound was torn from his lips by the rushing wind. Below him he saw the most horrifying sight of all. The fire from his fall was not just around him. It was spreading, raining down from the sky upon his village, upon the green forests and the thatched roofs, setting the world he knew ablaze. He had not just fallen, he had become the bringer of ruin, the instrument of his own prophecy. The sky itself seemed to weep tears of fiery rain, a chaotic, devastating canvas of his ultimate regret. The world ended not with a whimper, but with the sound of Toba's body crashing through the canopy of the great elderwood tree and slamming into the heart of the village square. The impact was a sickening crack of shell and a final, choked cry. He lay broken, a smoldering wreck in a circle of churned, blackened earth. His shell, his pride and joy, was a web of deep, painful fissures, scorched black and still steaming. The air was thick with the sounds of chaos, the roar of fire consuming homes, the terrified cries of animals, the desperate shouts of villagers fighting a losing battle against the raining embers. And then, as the villagers turned toward the source of the crashing sound, a silence fell over the clearing. They saw him. They saw Toba, the architect of their despair, lying broken in the ashes of his own hubris. Their faces were not of triumph, but of a profound, weary horror. He was alive, but barely. His vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was the small, soot-streaked face of the young hedgehog he had mocked, staring at him from the safety of its mother's arms, its eyes wide not with anger, but with a pity that was far, far worse. He drifted in and out of a pain-filled haze. In a moment of lucidity, he found himself alone in the charred circle. The villagers were fighting the fires that raged at the edges of the square, saving what they could. No one came to help him. He was a pariah, a cursed thing. The pain was immense, a fire of its own burning through his cracked shell. He tried to move, and an agonized gasp escaped him. Using the last of his strength, he lifted his head and saw his world transformed into a vision of hell. Blackened trees, smoldering homes, the frantic, exhausted faces of his former friends and neighbors. And lying there, surrounded by the devastation his pride had wrought, the words finally came, not as a boast, but as a broken confession to the uncaring sky. "If only," he whispered, his voice a raw scrape, "if only I had known." The words were not an excuse. They were an admission of total, catastrophic failure. They were the first true, selfless thought he had ever had, born from the utter ruin of his ego. He saw the villagers glance his way, their expressions a complex tapestry of anger, fear, and a reluctant, heartbreaking compassion. They were good, and he was not, and they were struggling with the choice of whether to help the one who had caused it all. As night began to fall, the fires in the village square guttered low, leaving behind a landscape of glowing embers and deep shadows. Toba drifted in a semi-conscious state, the line between dream and reality blurred. A figure emerged from the swirling smoke and settling ash. It was the old woman, but she was no longer bent. She stood straight and tall, her hood thrown back. Her face was ancient, etched with the lines of countless seasons, but her eyes held the timeless, patient light of the earth itself. She did not rush to his side. She did not offer a healing touch or a word of comfort. She simply stood over his broken form, her gaze sweeping over him, then over the scorched village. There was no "I told you so" in her expression. There was only a deep, knowing sadness and a flicker of something else, anticipation. "The seed of humility," she murmured, her voice now clear and strong like the sound of a deep underground stream, "only grows in the soil of regret. You have plowed the field, little one. Now we shall see what takes root." As she spoke, the cracked, blackened calabash, which had been lying near his side since his fall, began to pulse with a soft, persistent green light, thrumming with a low, vibrational energy that Toba could feel in his bones. With a groan that tore from the depths of his being, Toba forced himself to move. It was an agony beyond description. Every shift of his body sent shards of pain through his cracked shell. He did not try to stand, that was impossible. He began to crawl. He dragged his broken body through the ashes an inch at a time, and as he moved, he saw the true, detailed cost of his pride. He saw the charred remains of the squirrel family's nut store. He saw the mole's intricate tunnel system collapsed and filled with smoke. He saw a family of field mice huddled around the single, scorched toy of their youngest. This was not an abstract punishment. This was the tangible suffering of others caused by him. Each painful, scraping inch of his crawl was a mile of penance. The wind, still thick with ash, seemed to carry voices, not real voices, but the ghostly echoes of his own past. His boasts from the sunrock twisted into the weeping of the mother rabbit. His laughter at the festival became the terrified squeak of the young hedgehog. He was not just crawling through physical ashes. He was crawling through the wreckage of his own character. His painful journey brought him to the edge of the square, where a small, burning branch from the elderwood had fallen, trapping the very same young hedgehog he had mocked in a small alcove between two rocks. The hedgehog was terrified, crying, its small body trembling as the flames crept closer. Toba stopped. Every instinct born of self-preservation told him to save his strength, to keep crawling away. But looking at the helpless, terrified creature, all he could see was the consequence of his cruelty. With a grunt of effort, he pushed himself forward. He ignored the searing heat as he positioned his own large, cracked shell between the flames and the hedgehog. Using his head and his one good front leg, he pushed against the burning branch, shoving it aside just enough to create an opening. The effort sent fresh waves of fire through his body, and he cried out, collapsing onto his side. The hedgehog, seeing its chance, scrambled to safety, disappearing into the smoke. Toba lay panting in the soot, the side of his shell now smudged with fresh charcoal. He had done it. Not for praise, not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. As he lay there, exhausted and in more pain than ever, the calabash, which had been poolsing nearby, glowed not just green, but with a warm, golden light, and it rattled gently, not with warning, but with what sounded like approval. A soft, warm light fell upon him, cutting through the hazy gloom. He looked up. The old woman stood there, but she was transformed. No longer the humble beggar or the knowing observer, she was now radiant. Her form seemed to be woven from living roots, shimmering leaves, and rich, dark soil. A crown of fresh, dewy blossoms rested on her hair, and the scent of ozone and burnt honey was now the rich, fecund smell of life returning after a rain. She was the spirit of the earth, the guardian of all growing things. She knelt beside him, and her touch was not of pity, but of immense, nurturing power. "The fire of pride," she said, her voice the rustle of a vast forest, "can only be quenched by the waters of humility, Toba. You have taken the first sip. It was a bitter draught, was it not?" She placed a hand on the largest crack in his shell. A jolt not of pain, but of pure, vibrant life energy shot through him. A sensation so intense it was both agony and ecstasy, the feeling of a bone being reset by the sun itself. "Now," she said, her eyes holding his, "you must learn to drink deeply, for yourself and for all you have harmed." In that moment, Toba finally understood the scale of his mistake. He had been playing games with gods, and the entire world had been his collateral. He looked at the radiant earth spirit, and then at his own broken, smoldering body, and he began to tremble, not from pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming awe of his own folly and the immense, patient grace being offered to him. The Earth Spirit did not magically heal him. Instead, she gave him purpose. "The land is thirsty," she said, gesturing to the cracked, blackened earth. "The river is far and my children are weak. You still have strength in your legs. Carry water." And so began Toba's trials. He would crawl, agonizingly slowly, to the distant river, fill the magical calabash, which now held far more water than it should, and crawl back, dripping precious water onto the parched soil and into the mouths of exhausted, injured animals. His next task was to use his strong, though cracked, shell to dig and clear collapsed burrows. Then he was to use his slow, patient nature to guide the lost and the frightened through the still smoldering, unfamiliar landscape. Each act was grueling, a symphony of pain and exhaustion, but with each trip to the river his legs grew stronger. With each burrow he cleared, his shell seemed to knit itself a little more, the cracks sealing into permanent, dark scars. With each creature he safely guided, the weight on his soul lightened. One evening, after ensuring a family of displaced voles was safe in a new home, he looked at his reflection in the calabash's water. He saw a tortoise he barely recognized, weary, scarred, but with eyes that were no longer blind with pride but clear with purpose. And for the first time he did not weep for himself. He wept for the charred earth, for the scared animals, for the beauty he had destroyed. They were tears of true, selfless remorse. Curious about the change in his own eyes, he gazed deeper into the calabash. The water's surface shimmered and his reflection melted away. He was no longer looking at his face but into his own heart. It was a raging inferno, a landscape of vanity and selfishness that mirrored the burned village around him. He saw the flames of his boasts, the smoke of his lies, the scorched earth of his indifference. He watched, horrified, as the vision played out. Then a single tear, one of the many he had just shed, fell from his face and landed in the calabash. In the vision it did not sizzle away. It expanded, becoming a gentle, life-giving rain that fell upon the fiery hardscape. Where the raindrops touched, the flames hissed and died, leaving behind rich, black, fertile soil. The calabash in his hands grew heavy, not with the weight of water but with the weight of this newfound truth. He was not just watering the land, he was watering the seeds of a new self. The scars on his shell, he realized, were not just marks of punishment. They were the fertile cracks where a new, humble spirit could take root and grow. Weeks passed. Toba's work continued, now with a quiet, steady rhythm. He was no longer crawling but walking, his body healed but forever marked. One afternoon, he was helping to place the final stone for a new badger set, using his head to nudge a heavy rock into place. As the stone settled with a satisfying asterisk thud, a warmth spread through his shell. He looked back. The permanent, dark scars that webbed across his carapace were no longer just dark lines. They were glowing, pulsing with a soft, green-gold light that seemed to come from within him. And where his feet touched the earth, the most miraculous thing happened. Green shoots, vibrant and strong, burst forth from the ashes. Tiny wildflowers, their heads a defiant yellow and blue, sprouted in the exact footprint he left behind. He took a step, and another patch of life erupted. The villagers who had been watching his quiet labor with cautious curiosity now stopped their work entirely. They stared as Toba became a walking source of renewal, his glowing, scarred shell a beacon, his path a trail of life through the gray desolation. A young child, a rabbit kit, overcome with wonder, reached out and touched his glowing shell. Her hand came away clean, tinged with light, and she smiled, a brilliant, hopeful smile that had been absent from the village since the fire. The earth spirit appeared once more, her radiance blending with the light from Toba's shell. "The strength you have been given," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "is not a crown for you to wear. It is a tool for you to wield. It is for them." She gestured to the watching villagers, to the recovering land. Toba looked at the spirit, then at the people. He did not hesitate. He did not pause to bask in his newfound power. He simply turned, and the light from his shell flared brighter. He walked to the largest pile of debris, the remains of the communal hall, and began to push, using his strong, healed body and the energy flowing through him to shift beams and stones that would have taken a dozen animals to move. He worked not as a king, but as the humblest of laborers. He guided the young and the old to safer paths. He used the gentle light from his shell to comfort a frightened creature hiding in a dark hole. With every selfless act, the light spread further from his body, a visible, cinematic wave of healing energy that flowed outwards, causing grass to carpet the square, flowers to bloom on blackened trees, and hope to finally, fully, return to the hearts of the villagers. As the village shimmered with new life, the sky spirits descended. But this time they did not bring storm or fire. They came in forms of gentle mist and soft sunlight. The great fire spirit was among them, its form now a contained, warm hearth fire, its voice the comforting crackle of a campfire. It floated before Toba, who instinctively began to bow his head. "No, little one," the fire spirit said, its voice warm. "Do not bow in submission. We meet now as guardians of a shared world. You have learned the lesson written in the stars themselves, that a shell is not a throne but a shelter for a compassionate heart. That strength is not for dominance but for defense of the weak. You are now truly wise." Toba looked at the spirits of the sky and the spirit of the earth, and then at the thriving, grateful village. He felt no pride, only a profound, humbling gratitude. He had not just saved the village, he had been saved from himself. The wisdom he now possessed was not a weapon for winning arguments, but a tool for building a better world. He finally understood that his greatest achievement would never be a story he told about himself, but the silent, thriving world around him. Seasons turned. The village was now more beautiful and resilient than ever before. The scars of the fire were still there, but they were woven into the landscape, a part of its history and its strength. Toba was often found not on the sunrock but in its shade, surrounded by a new generation of young animals. His shell still bore its dark, web-like scars, and in the twilight they still held a faint, gentle glow. He did not tell them stories of his own cleverness. He told them his story of fire and fall and regret. His voice was gentle, his eyes held the memory of pain and the peace of redemption. "Do not let your shell become a prison of your own pride," he would say, his gaze resting on each young, bright face. "For the greatest strength is gentle, the wisest voice is quiet, and the shell that shines brightest is the one that has learned to bow." He paused, letting the words settle in the quiet air. "Had I known then what I know now, the fire would never have fallen. The pain would never have been sown. But now," he finished, his voice a soft whisper filled with love and hope, "you know." The tortoise's shell once burned with pride and the world around him scorched. But even in the ashes, humility can grow. Wisdom is not in boasting, nor in cleverness alone. It is in kindness, patience, and the courage to bow when the heart knows better. Let this story remind us all. Had we known, pride would never rule and fire would never fall. But now the lesson is ours to live, to share, and to carry forward. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, sometimes the heaviest shells carry the greatest lessons.